Muy buenos días a todas y todos. Un gran placer darles la más cordial bienvenida a nuestro primer panel. Pero antes de invitar a nuestras y nuestros panelistas que suban a la mesa, quisiera personalmente también agradecer a la Universidad Nacional de Cuyo y sobre todo a nuestra anfitriona Fernanda Beigel por organizar este evento en esa maravillosa, ¿cómo se llama? Cilindro se llama, ¿no? En esa sala. Es un gran placer y un honor estar aquí. Tenemos 4 panelistas para este primer panel sobre el drenaje de las publicaciones académicas en las corrientes del mercado rentable, y quedamos en no hacer así grandes presentaciones de las personas porque nos vamos conociendo, y entonces eso nos hace o haría perder mucho tiempo. Entonces yo solamente voy a invitar a las personas y también mencionar las instituciones, comenzando con Stefanie Haustein, la School of Information Studies de la University of Ottawa en Canadá, y también co-directora de la School Com Lab. Después tenemos Vincent Larivière de la Université de Montréal. Tenemos Fernanda, que ya está en el escenario, y tenemos Juan Pablo Alperin de la Fraser University, Canadá, y co-director también del School Com Lab. Un placer. Yo me voy a quedar aquí. Tenemos como 20 minutos para cada uno. Tengo 2 carteles. Uno dice 5 minutos, otro dice game over. Bueno, es como orientación, ¿no? Porque sabemos todos que es súper interesante escuchar ponencias, pero también es muy lindo poder discutir. Entonces, vamos comenzando con Stefanie Haustein.
Vielen Dank. Thank you very much for the kind introduction. Thank you for Fernanda for inviting us here. This is my first time to Argentina, but less than 24 hours in Mendoza, I can already say it's not going to be the last time. So I have the honor of getting us started, and I'm talking about a paper that Fernanda, Vincent, and actually another 9 authors or something like that, or a lot, have been working on for the last 6 months or so, and we call it the drain of scientific publishing. It has lots of evidence in there. I think none of that will be news to you, but it's really a call to action, to change something. And I'm going to focus on one of the aspects of the drain of scientific publishing, namely money. And then I think Vincent and Fernanda are going to address 2 of the other ones. But just to give you an overview, so we identify a 4-fold drain of basically of how academia and the scholarly communication is being drained. So we have time. We all know the issue of too many papers to read, too many papers to review. We all spend an enormous amount of time in our different roles as authors, as reviewers, as editors, but also on committees to review the extreme amount of scholarly manuscripts and documents. And this is the part that Vincent is also going to focus on, of how we're being drained there. We also are seeing a drain of trust, or the loss of trust, because more and more, also especially because of the so-called AI slob that we've been seeing over the past few years, especially through LLMs and ChatGPT, where because of this pressure to publish, there are a lot of corners being cut. And therefore, because of this pressure to publish, more and more we see a loss of quality. And we see more and more rejections because of there's fabricated data, false content, and so on. So because of this erosion of rigor, we are, I think, running into the issue of losing the trust of the public into science. We also have something that Fernanda is also going to address later, of control. This is in the context of rankings and metrics, and We all know the impact factor and the H-index and all of these other metrics that are really flawed, but they're also based on very biased databases that journals published in English and the global north and so on. And these databases are also controlled by for-profit industry. And finally, the money drain, which I'm going to focus on today, so to give you a few numbers of how much money we're actually losing to a for-profit publishing industry that is doing extremely well, and also extremely well compared to other industries. We always talk about big oil, big pharma being the bad guys. It's actually big publishing who are much worse. So I tried with Fernanda's help, but we have a Spanish version of this as well. So this infographic has just been helping to kind of promote the main ideas. So let's start with money. I was digging a little bit into statistics. This is from the ARL member library. So this is the American Research Libraries. This is 168, I think, member libraries, mostly in the US, but some in Canada. Because it's really hard to get these numbers right. Libraries, and I'm sure the gentleman from the library here knows the numbers for their institution, but it's hard to get by how much university libraries have been spending for academic publishers, because until very recently, and some still are, there are non-disclosure agreements that they can't actually say this is how much we pay to Elsevier, Springer Nature. But there are these stats, and you see you know, expenses, and obviously and rightfully so, the expenses in HR, the librarians are a lot, but you see how much is paid to subscriptions, and that we're at just under $4 billion US in the last year of library expenses, and about well, definitely more than 1 billion is going to journal subscriptions. In terms of revenue, these numbers are even harder to get by, because we can look at annual reports, which is actually what we did by the big publishers. The companies that are listed, that are in the stock market, they publish their numbers, but they don't always give you the most precise one. So the one estimate that I think is actually the closest to reality, or trying to also get numbers on, we still have a lot of private publishers who are not listed on the stock market, MDPI, Frontier, so we have absolutely no clue what they're making. I tried to reverse engineer the data here. So this is from Delta Think, who are actually a company, I think US-based, and they have a deal with publishers that publishers every year give them information about how much did we make from subscriptions and how much did we make from APCs. But they're providing this data under the promise that Delta Think will only aggregate them and not call out or identify how much the individual companies are making. But I think this is the closest estimate to globally how much these companies are making for scholarly communication, for academic journals. And I've been working the past years on trying to estimate APC spending and open access, and those are really big numbers. But you do see here that we're still, most of the money is still made through paywalls and subscriptions. So keep that in mind when I'll show you the numbers for APCs. That's really still a small fraction, not even 20% of what these publishers are making. So this is a study that we've been doing over the last couple of years or so. First without funding, and now we actually have a project that we can hire lots of students, and some of them also here to help us with this kind of data. So we want to bring more transparency and more evidence into how big this market actually is. And except for the publishers themselves, nobody knows actually what we're spending on article processing charges. Not even, I can speak for University of Ottawa, but I know this is the case for almost all universities in Canada and also the US. An institution doesn't know how much they're spending on article processing charges because it's not captured centrally, because most of these, you know, 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 5,000, or if you publish in Nature, almost $13,000 per article, those come from research budgets of individual PIs or authors. So there is no central system that actually captures what does the entire community at an institution spend. So what we're trying to do is not, it's just an estimation, and we've been doing this for a few years And some of this data was captured in El País, for example, or different news media, and then they always ask Springer Nature and Elsevier as the biggest one for comment. And they always try to discredit our work. And then I say, I'd happily retract this study if you prove me wrong. Please, just release the actual numbers, and then we can see how close we are, but then they never do. So because of that, this is all we have. And how did we do this? Well, so we've been spending a lot of time in collecting annual article processing charges per journal. So in this data set, we had about, I think, 36,000 data points. So the APC per journal per year for these large publishers, so for the 5 biggest ones. And then we multiply it with the papers published in these journals in that year, which we obtained in this case from OpenAlex, but we also did some checks with Dimension, and we've previously done it with Web of Science. So we are multiplying it either, if it's an open access journal, then we know that for every single research article published, we assume that an APC was paid. If it's hybrid, we have to actually track, if it's a hybrid journal, we have to track if the individual papers had a CC BY license, and then we assume, again, in order for that paper to have a CC BY license, somebody paid a hybrid open access fee, and then we multiply it. And so if you look at this over the last, until 2023, we were at almost exactly at $2.5 billion US to just these 5 publishers, and remember, just for the APC part. So that's not including the subscriptions. What's also interesting, we know that MDPI and Frontiers, these newer kids on the block that are doing open access only, they've been really focusing on quantity. So MDPI especially have rather, compared to the market, lower APCs, but they publish a huge quantity of papers, and that's again also related to the issue that we see about AI slob. I don't know if any of you remember in Frontiers the giant rat penis. Yes. So there's a lot of things that get published because now suddenly the publishers are motivated to publish more and quicker, because with any additional paper published, they get an APC. What's also interesting to see is that MDPI and Frontiers are kind of reaching a ceiling. So they've actually, their growth that you can see between 2019 and 2022 has not continued in 23. We think this is most likely due to a lot of these paper mills and scandals that came out, that people are starting to hesitate to publish there. So maybe there's a ceiling. But what's also interesting for the more traditional established, first coming from the subscription model, but really fully embracing the APC model, Elsevier, Springer Nature, and Wiley, their growth is largest for hybrid. And if you remember, hybrid was supposed to be temporary, something that they came up with 20 years ago or so, to help them move from subscription, from paywall content to fully open access. But it's been such a lucrative model that that temporal change is taking its time, let's say. We also, this is actually a graph that Juan made, the violin plot here, and we were lucky that this was published in Science News a year and a half ago. It's really shown on the left side of the violin plot is basically the supply of the publishers. So it counts every journal once that has a specific APC. So you see on the left side also something that is counterintuitive but been proven over and over by different studies, that gold journal APCs are on average lower than hybrid, which is ironic because gold journals are completely financed by APCs, while with hybrid journals they're already completely financed by subscription. So there's this double dipping. And why are the fees higher? Well, because that's the prestige, because authors are willing to pay it. And the prestigious journals that have been there for a long time tend to be subscriptions, and that's where the publishers are reluctant to actually move to fully open access, so that's why they're higher. So on average, 3,200 on a hybrid journal. And then on the right side of the graph, you actually see where authors went. So compared to the supply of counting every journal once, this is computing the average or showing the distribution of where did authors mostly publish. So you get that nice little flag on the right for hybrid. Again, this was 2023 data, the 11,690, this is Nature. So if you want to publish hybrid in Nature, you have to pay that. Right now it's 12,600, I think. So interesting, you see that little flag. There aren't that many journals that have these extremely high APCs because they're not warranted. We think the production of a paper is maybe up to $1,000, but it's not warranted. There's complete disconnect between what it costs to produce the paper, because we have typesetting, we have manuscript handling, and so on. We have the cost, although not very high cost, of running a server and putting up a bunch of PDFs. But then what they're charging, the fee, is completely disconnected from the production cost. And that's how, as I'll show you in the next slides, these publishers are making a lot of profit. You also see some differences on the right. It's a bit smaller. You can read that in our preprint between the publishers. Plus, on the bottom right is a big outlier, because they do have higher APC gold journals, but the mega journal +1, that's why you get the spike on the bottom right, has a fairly low, or compared to the market, lower APC. This is not actual numbers, but that's me trying to visually represent the complexity of the money flows for academic publishing. So usually you have a government funder that pays for research. You might also have private funders, but they provide a budget to researchers to do research. And then some of that money is used not for research, but it's used for these APCs, which goes directly to the publisher. And then obviously, if we've seen in the previous graph, the libraries are still paying lots of subscriptions. So from the overhead of these research grants, but also the government funding for running the university, they pay the publishers a lot through different models. So subscriptions, but the newer forms also big deals, or for me, it's come full circle with the so-called read and publish or transformative agreements, where they're again trying to charge the library up front. It's kind of like an all-you-can-eat buffet or something, where the libraries are now paying, which is good in the sense that the economic barrier is removed from the individual authors, but there's still a huge difference between institutions globally of the ones that can afford to have these read and publish agreements, and then your authors can publish for free. Again, it's not free, it's just prepaid, and then institutions that don't have them. And so the one actual number in there is the profit margin. So the 38% here, for example, from Elsevier leaves the system completely and goes to the smart people who invested in Elsevier stock. So that's just to show the financial flows. And then what we've been doing for the DRAIN paper this year is to actually go into, I'm an information scientist by training, but I've read a lot of annual reports this year of these companies. So they're often companies that, so RELX, for example, is the larger company that Elsevier is part of. But the subsections of the companies here and the parent publishers, we're trying to get to what part of the company is journal publishing. And that's not always easy, but just to highlight here that in every single case, so first of all, if you take the average of these for-profit companies, it's 34%. That's just unimaginable in terms of profit. But you have to remember that we provide everything for free as a community. We give them the manuscripts for free. We do the peer review for free, and almost all editors or editorial board members are also doing it for free. Some editors-in-chief might get a small fee or some amount for appreciation of their work, but it's probably more in the ballpark of 1 APC per year, and not an actual salary for the work that they're doing. It's also interesting to see that the journal division of these publishers is always more profitable than the parent company. Another interesting fact here, this was my PhD student Chantal who pointed me to, again, I'm not an economist, but there's a database that has the Dow Jones profits, and they provide industry averages. And we found the one for the publishing industry, so this is publishing overall, including, publishers that actually pay their novelists for writing books. So the average of the entire industry of publishing is 12%, but then academic publishing, the big ones here, it's 34%. And when you compare, this is a bit small, but we always think of, I mentioned big pharma, big oil as the bad guys. They're very far from being as lucrative as these publishers. The same kind of ballpark is actually right now information technology, especially those AI companies. So the highest profitable large IT company was Microsoft at 35%. That's still lower than Elsevier, okay? And you have to remember that the academic publishers are mostly funded by taxpayer dollars. Well, the IT companies, well, they do get some, but not mostly, right? And I just wanted to briefly also touch upon, Fernanda's going to talk more about control, but I wanted to focus on the money angle here for control as well. The research assessment and all of the metadata and the data that we're using to try to map scholarly publishing, research output, impact, and so on, that's also controlled by for-profit companies. So Elsevier, again, that's the same player. They have moved on from being an academic publisher. They're now a data analytics company. And they have this is actually from their annual report. They have this amazing pipeline and how they're actually not just using the metadata of the publication itself, but the entire research lifecycle and our user data about how we're using this, and are selling it back to us. So they have a lot of products. They have also acquired a lot of startups over the years. Some of you might remember Mendeley in Canada, and for the bibliometric community, the one that hurt most was Science Metrics. So they just been buying up these companies to basically control the entire research lifecycle. And the other big one is, of course, Clarivate, which now hosts the Web of Science. Previously it was Thomson Reuters and so on. But they control the impact factor that still, although we know how flawed it is, it's still a very powerful metric in academic careers, and they're even more profitable than Elsevier. So they were at 41.5% last year. I think the year before they were even higher, about 42%. So we don't want to leave you with this very depressing evidence, but our paper is a call to action, and we firmly believe that we can stop this, because it's up to us as a community to change the system, and the way that it's built now is also not set in stone. It has developed, and we have ourselves to blame too, because we've been using these prestige venues as a marker of academic careers. But we think we can stop it, and I'm an optimist. So we think that funders and institutions must actually intervene, because they're the powerful players. We've been in open science especially asking a lot from individual researchers to change how they do science, and that's true and that's important. But if we keep this misalignment between the open science policies and what we want researchers to do, but then evaluate their careers on the almost extreme opposite of publishing in high impact, mostly closed access journals, then we will not get very far. And that's, I think, why in the past 20 years or so we've gotten it's even gotten worse in a sense. So we actually proposed something, and we discussed a lot about the terminology, but we're calling it recommunalization. When I talk in the US or in the North American context, I always say, no, not communism, don't worry. But we already have all of this open infrastructure, especially in South America. And then we're very proud in Canada too about PKP and OJS. In the Érudit, there are all of these open systems that exist already. We can run them at a fraction of the cost. We just have to realign how we assess and evaluate careers. So thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to our discussions about this. Oops.
Thank you so much, Stefanie, for this optimistic presentation. No, but I think the end is rather an important message. We are going to follow up with Vincent.
I will be standing up. I hate to be sitting while talking. It makes awkward conversations at home because I'm standing up at dinner, so it's a bit problematic. Maybe one quick point and follow up on Steffi. With Érudit, we tried to count or assess how expensive it was to publish a paper, to kind of contrast with the APCs. And of course, it's not so easy to get that number, but we're at about $100. And that's in Canadian dollars. And that's with all of the workers being in Canada. So nothing is outsourced to India or places like that. So it kind of gives a context to these crazy high APCs. Okay, so I'll talk about another element of the drain, which is trust, but mostly focusing on peer review. Do we still need peer review in today's academe? Considering that this is quite often the element that journals are saying, you need us because we do peer review. Of course, they don't do peer review. they manage peer review, but they appropriate the content of those reviews, and I think in some cases they own the reviews that people give for free. And maybe another follow-up on Steffi, because I have plenty of time with my 50 slides. A lot of publishers like Frontiers pay their editors, and they pay their editors quite a lot. So I've learned from some of my colleagues that actually he makes $20,000 USD to be a section editor at Frontiers, and it takes him about 1 day a month. So what does Frontier does by doing that? It buys scientific capital, it buys symbolic capital. So no one really is interested into Frontiers to start with, but if you give me $20,000, I know they're not so good, but you know, I mean, I need to send the kids to school and stuff like that. So yeah, so given that they control the financial, over time they can control the symbolic. And you may have heard of the Frontiers Prize. Have you heard of that? Which is a kind of a new, they try to make that a Nobel Prize. You know, their game is to gain symbolic capital. So it's called the Frontiers Prize. And you know how much a Nobel Prize is? It's about $1 million. So what does Frontiers do? They create a prize of $3 million. They don't have symbolic capital, but they have economic capital. So all of these things circulate, and probably, if we are not careful, in 20 years, that prize may become as prestigious as the Nobel Prize, because it starts with more money. So we're in deep shit, actually. Okay, so yeah, optimism, yeah. So, yeah. No, this one is a bit more optimistic. So I don't really have an answer to the fact that we still need peer review, but the one thing is sure is that there's a peer review crisis. There's a lot of challenges right now in the system, and I want to survey them and maybe have a discussion on that. So of course, peer review is everywhere, funding, papers, etc. There's many forms of peer review. And in the end, open peer review, we can debate that, is probably not the solution to our issues with peer review. Of course, it's kind of old, but in reality, for many journals, it's fairly recent. I think Nature implemented it in its form in the 1970s. So it's not something that was there forever. It's something that actually was adopted at different moments in time, as we'll see in a few seconds. One thing that is crucial is that from the outset, it's always based on trust. People don't reproduce the experiment. So it really is I believe you that you did that, which has strengths and weaknesses. And of course, no one would accept to do reviews if they had to do everything from the start. So really, it's a functional way of seeing that. What does it do? So of course, the first view is that it's quality control. Of course, it varies drastically by journal, but that's kind of the way we found to make sure that the knowledge that is being produced is of quality. Typically, a review will look at the internal consistency. So is the method that is presented appropriate to obtain those results, as well as external consistency. So are those results consistent, with what we know about the phenomena in the literature? So that's basically what we're doing. And it follows, in a way, it follows Merton in the sense that reviewers should not have any interest. So they should be disinterested. They should not evaluate the manuscript negatively because they hate the person. Of course, it happens all the time, but that's kind of the norm should be disinterestedness. Sorry, it's dry here. And then organized skepticism. So that's basically, yeah, give me some water. Awkward silence. Merci. And then organized skepticism is the fact that at first, everyone wants your paper to be rejected. At first, it's a collectively, we don't want you to succeed. But that's not really the case, but that's kind of the norm. Of course, the filters vary by the journal. And then there's plus that came with, we accept your papers because it makes sense. We're not trying for you to be original, etc. It grew, and I'll go fast on that, mostly because there's more papers, so there's more pressure on the system. We need it because editors-in-chief are no longer specialists of everything. So at Einstein's era, Max Planck could basically understand every paper. I don't understand every paper in QSS. Of course, don't say that publicly, but like there are some papers that I receive, if they're full of equations, I need someone to help me. So fields have specialized, and so editor-in-chief are no longer understanding everything. Submission platforms, that sounds trivial, but it really streamlined peer review. That gives us a technical system to actually do that. And then peer review has the seal of validity. That is the good science because it has been peer review. One interesting citation that I like a lot is that of Albert Einstein, where basically in the 1930s, he sends a paper to physical review. And he is very angry because for the first time in his life, he receives an external review. So basically he says, I've submitted that paper to be published, not to be criticized. So on the basis of this incident, hey, you showed my paper to someone else. I did not give you the permission. I prefer to publish the paper elsewhere. So that's it gives an idea that at some point, hey, you don't do that. But in the end, the referee was right. Einstein was wrong. Einstein calmed down, did the reviews, and then published a paper. It's actually a paper on gravitational waves, which is a relatively important paper. So I've got some data on peer review. One issue with that data is that it comes from Clarivate. So of course, Clarivate purchased many things. It purchased Publons, which is the kind of the review platform. But they made a report a couple of years ago, which I think is very revealing. It's one of the few data that we have on peer review. So is peer review important for researchers? And I wish when I send invitations to review that people would remind that. So when you do the sum, it's basically 99%, 98% of researchers who actually believe reviewing is important. Peer review is something important. So collectively, we think that this is important. How many reviews are there per papers? Well, actually, it varies a lot by discipline. In geosciences, computer science, 2.5, 3 reviews per paper. I don't know where they find them, but it works. Agricultural, closer to 1, economics and business, etc. So kind of a lot of different types of filters that different discipline will use. This is the one that really, really struck me. Okay, so you ask scientists, why do you conduct reviews? And most, you see that there's not one reason. There's really is a diversity of reason. It's my job. It's a burden. I have to do it. I need to do my fair share. I need to be up to date with the literature. That's a good reason. And then only a third say that it's because they want to ensure the quality of research. So the filtering idea that people have, like peer review is the research that is right or validated, basically only a third of people who actually believe that. So to me, that was actually quite striking. Like we know as a community that it's far from being perfect. Uneven weight, 10% of people do 50% of the reviews. Thanks, Diego. Totally. I mean, as an editor, you have your go-to people, typically your team, because they cannot say no. Thanks, guys. This is amazing to me. The decline in completed reviews, okay? And that's only over 5 years. The proportion of reviews that are agreed that are actually completed. And I'm sure the systems are, there's, like I pester you, will you review? Okay, I will review, you say yes, and then in the end, you never do it. Because it's a service. I mean, you are right not to do the review. And thanks, Juan, for the one you did a couple of days ago. And then median review time. Everyone knows that economists take forever. There are total outliers in the system. And then chemistry, basically around 10 days to do the reviews, which is very functional. It means fast publication cycles, etc. Overall manuscript acceptance rate about 55%, which seems high, but that's within the Publon system. And that to me is a very crucial data point. The growth in the number of invitations, and that's again just over 5 years. In order to get 2 reviewers, people had to ask 3.8 people, basically 4. Now we're at about 5, and it's estimated, because there's no recent number, that we're at about 7 point something. For QSS, we're at about 8 people. In order to get 2 referees, I need to ask 8 people. And sometimes I have to ask 20 people. And that's a bit crazy, because it means that your 19th and 20th person that you're asking, they are not your first choice. So their capacity to review the paper they may not be expert. Just give me a review somewhere. So it's a complex situation, which means that quite often I do the desk rejects. Like if I'm unable to find a reviewer, then I do a general evaluation, and then I say, well, no one's interested in reviewing that, so probably no one is really interested in the paper. But yeah, so it's a kind of a bit of a depressing. People are fed up with reviewing, and why? Okay, I'll go quick on that. Okay, journal rejection rates are related with impact factors. This is not surprising. Now entering the peer review crisis. Okay, so basically number of papers over time that talk about peer review crisis. So you see that, yeah, it's kind of exponential, starting in about 2010. And one of the main reasons for that is, of course, the production growth. We are publishing, I would argue, too much. Of course, we understand all why we need to publish, but overall, the system publishes too much, which we need to understand not as we're producing too much science. We're actually producing too much papers. For the capacity of the system to read them, to evaluate them, to integrate them overall. And we're actually increasing, just quickly, like we passed 1 million papers in 1985, then 2 million papers in 2003. So it took 18 years to grow by 1 million paper, and now we're gaining 1 million paper every couple of years. So the system is overproducing, and it's overproducing by researchers. So taking world's researchers as a denominator, each individual researcher, or collectively, we are producing twice as much over the last 30 years or so. Are we more clever than our predecessors? I kind of doubt it. We do have more technology to produce papers faster, but the threshold for publication did not increase. So given that we can do better research, then we should have more stringent thresholds, I believe, and then maybe to keep productivity stable. We don't, and so we're producing more. Quite in contrast, what we're seeing is that articles are more and more complex. So it's a bit, we're actually not cutting necessarily corners. It's just that we have more capacity to publish more complete stories with 100 pages of supplementary material that no one reads except one reviewer that rejects your paper in the end. But the point is that papers are actually not shorter. And of course, this is a bit incomplete. That's a study that's based on a couple of journals and mostly elite-ish journals. I'm not sure it's true of MDPI papers, but there's definitely a subset of papers that are more content. Okay, so what does peer review change? Is peer review improving the manuscript? So I have a couple of cartoons to illustrate the point. You probably have already seen that. You do a little paper, it's fine. It at least it's coherent. But then in order to answer to everyone's comments, you end up having, yeah, a Frankenstein-ish of a paper, and it probably happened to some of you where you actually believe that the published paper is not as good as the original paper. But in some cases, it does improve the paper, so it's not a perfect system. That one, I love it, poor soul, beaten down by peer review. There's a cost, a personal cost to peer review, especially for, yeah, Natsu. No, but there's a cost to that in the sense that writing a paper, your discoveries are something that is quite often close to your heart, and then having comments that are not often the kindest is not the best. Thank you. And then this one is amazing because it reminds us of the social aspect of peer review. This is fine as it goes. From here, it's who you know. That's going to determine if the paper is published, which is kind of not entirely true, but at least partly true. We see it with those researchers who are able to publish in Science and Nature all the time. So the current challenges, and I'll kind of conclude on that, or I'm actually close to concluding. The weight of researcher is crazy, bottlenecks, etc. I've mentioned the no access to source data. Of course, this is changing, but it's changing very slowly. All of the conflicts of interest. It's a process that actually really is conservative. So it promotes kind of normal science, a lot of Matthew effects, and of course, plenty of inappropriate comments. Imperfect evaluations, and this is really, it's a very small study, but to me it's very revealing. So the British Medical Journal made an experiment. They sent a very short paper of 600 words to 600 words to 300 reviewers. Okay, and the paper had 8 errors, obvious errors that basically high school-ish undergrad students would get. No evaluator found more than 5 errors. Median number of errors found 2. There's 20% of evaluators that said, this is excellent. You just published that. And so if peer review was a drug that we're trying to put on the market, it would not pass the standard because we have plenty of evidence of its adverse effects and not really any evidence that it works. Open reviews are actually much shorter and much kinder, so they're not necessarily the right thing to include. We know that peer review does not make a huge difference on manuscripts. Basically, for about 60% of papers, between the preprint and the published version, there's really no changes. About 20, well, a bit less than that, 10% of papers have significant, very small changes in the figures, and only 20% of papers have significant content that is added. So why do we have all of this burden? And again, I don't have a clear answer to that, and we need to think of a lot of different factors. So of course, in medical sciences, I think we should have some form of control. I would like to take drugs that have been validated, not like when I was a teenager. But in physics, it's something that's a bit different, you see? So the consequences, you may remember a couple of years ago, there was a paper that showed that the speed of light could be faster than what people theoretically thought. So there was an empirical discovery. Oh, in some contexts, it can go faster. So what happened? Plenty of theoreticians tried to think, oh yeah, that's interesting, and then made equations. The issue was just that there was a cable that was plugging and unplugging in the machine. That was an artifact. So the paper was retracted. No consequences except for the time lost by theoreticians, again, which is fine. So pressures on the system, I like theoreticians. Most papers end up being published, and overall, too much focusing on peer review kind of also overemphasizes publications. We're counting peer-reviewed publication, that's the standard, and so it creates kind of an article publishing culture that I think we can all be critical of. So voila, thank you very much.
Thank you, Vincent. You didn't even let me show my last card. So thank you for the discipline. What a great panel. Very interesting. We are going to follow up with Fernanda. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. Let's see if I can put this here. So everything will be okay with the translator again. Okay, so no, not yet. Can you start? Oh, no, this is just what we've already been speaking about. So the next one, please. But Manu, I'm controlling this, right? Oh, okay. Yeah. I think I'm not controlling it, but okay. Can I try now? No. You did it, right? Yeah, maybe we're both of us. But I'm just going to start here by saying that I will try to continue the discussion here with an aspect that already Steffi mentioned as recommunalization, and an aspect that could be a bit more optimistic, I think. And the first and most important thing is that while all these commercial publishers were growing, there were other publishing circuits also. And so it was interesting for our discussion and to me it was always striking, not only in the discussion but before, that it was very normal in the global north to speak about the publishing market. And to me, it was always strange, you know, because I said, why are we always speaking of a publishing market? And it was very simple. This big publishers, academic publishing is a market, but we have another, and not only the Latin American publishing circuit, but others that are not dominated, not even crossed by these commercial publishers. So I think in that discussion, let's see if now something is strange, but no worries. And so what I did when I started to see this thing about the market is, first of all, to go back to Bourdieu and try to discuss the notion of field and the notion of community and the notion of diamond, which is what I'm going to speak about now. I can try now. Should be, no, okay. Okay, and let's go to this one. And so the first thing I wanted to talk to you about now is open science, open access brought to publishing many changes. And so I prepared this graph or this drawing that has to do with the different tensions within the what we should call the academic global field, and the intrusion of different publishing circuits, and how scholarly publishing is really crossed by many circuits. And so in this kind of a Bourdieusian scheme, if you read it from the center, you're going to find 4 quadrants. And in these 4, don't see this, Pierre, as a real correspondence analysis. It is not. It is just a drawing, but it tries to show that we have like 4 different spaces. In the top, both quadrants in the top are really featured by exclusion, extraction, what I would say heteronomy. And the 2 that are down there are featured by inclusion, autonomy, and different degrees of openness. And so in the top part, I make a difference, and I'm including there the publishing companies and also the different platforms and public type of organizations that lead the Latin American circuit. And in the top, you can see there is a difference, of course, between the commercial publishers that are leading APC type of paid publishing, or even the whole conglomerate that includes Crossref and the publishers. I put there Open Alex because we could discuss where it should be. I'm trying to play with it because it's not completely, it is open, it is an open infrastructure, but we really don't know where it's going to go. So I'm putting it there. In some ways, it is not completely open in the sense that, or inclusive, in the sense that you have to have a DOI to be there, and there are so much production without a DOI. And in the left side, of course, concentration, and particularly concentration and centralization of academic symbolic power, not precisely on the right part of this scheme. And in the lower part, I think we have on the right side very crowded type of circuit in the lower quadrant and the right quadrant, because I think there we have many alternative circuits, and particularly the Latin American one, which is big, old, standing. I'm going to speak about this because it's mainly the one I know. And on the left, I'm just mentioning that we still have in open science some closeness that has to do with the protection of subaltern communities, and also the big issue of digital sovereignty that we're not going to be able to discuss now. And so I think that we now have the big challenge of the alternatives for this. Maybe the colleagues in the Global North have more confidence that we can really talk to the funders. I'm not really sure we can do that a lot, but suppose we are going to work in that line. The other one, and in Europe this has been fostered and really with a lot of actions, the idea, and you see the Diamond study of 2023, is 2021, is to push Diamond publishing, which is normally Diamond is the journal that doesn't charge a fee to read or to publish. It is a concept in discussion. Leslie Chan, for example, has told us, well, remember, it's awful to go from gold to diamond, so these extractive type of minerals are not really very nice. But it's not only that, and that's what I would like to discuss now, because the fact is that really this marketization and this big publishers have detached completely scholarly publishing from the academic field. So how are we going to recommunalize this as what we really understand as scholarly publishing? Is this going to help, Vincent, to reform the peer review system? I'm not really sure, but maybe we can find a way to solve this. And so the fact is that we have a lot of journals that are living outside this commercial type of circuit. There are many challenges that are very old to these journals, and Juan Pablo, you are the first that has talked about this many, many years ago before our team did that, which is that we have challenges that have to do with sustainability, with coverage, with visibility, and these are all challenges for the Latin American journals. And today, I think legitimacy is a challenge that is there for the commercial publishers. And so we have a very good opportunity, I think, to try to push with our Latin American journals. But the million-dollar question is, how are we going to change the beliefs of our researchers that really think that the best option is here? The best option are these journals that charge 10,000 or 12,000 euros or dollars. And so fast here, what we prepared is there are many definitions of diamond journals, but if you compare them, all have really something that is common. It's not only the editorial or technical openness or editorial performance, but it is the idea that they are community driven, and so community led. That's the idea. And I think that we can go that way to change this use of the diamond model and to try to think more on what does this mean to be academically owned or community driven. And so the DOAS standards, which are these diamond open access standards that the Coalition S is trying to drive, says, well, we have 7 standards that have to be met by these diamond journals, and I suppose because they're going to try to give funds to many of these journals. And we prepared a work on all the reports that we can find that have discussed the definition of diamond, that have made contributions to the conceptual discussion, and these are here, and the newest projects and the oldest, like the AMAS. And just with a very simple type of conceptual analysis, what we found, and I think always Manu, because I couldn't do this if Manu wasn't here, but we found many other things that didn't have to do exactly with the 7 standards. And the first and most important was the institution, which is very big in the understanding of all these reports, QARA, evaluation, research assessment, quality. And so that's where we started to organize this and say, well, we need to reinforce some of these standards. And so one of the most important standards that we should discuss is, what is this definition of a community-led journal? A diamond journal, a non-profit journal, no fee. We don't know even how to call this because we don't have transparent information. And Munir and Rorik, which are really have been pushing the Diamas project and the Coalition S shift to diamond, they have written a very interesting recent book and paper on this. And to be simple, I have discussed with them a lot. They are saying, well, the community about we are talking about is really the journal. Behind the journal, you have a community. And they say, well, a journal represents this community. They have examples, as Glossa, the one that Rorik was a director and resigned from Forma Lingua. And the definition of a journal as a research community is, they say, related to an active, specialized audience featured by a double practice of authorship and readership. And this really sounds like the old journals that were created by the learned societies in Europe, and they're not so similar to our journals, you know, because we have journals created by learned societies, but most of the journals in Latin America are owned and published by the universities. And so that's why I'm asking, isn't that an exception more than the rule? And so very quickly, you know that these are the main platforms and networks that organize what we call our regional publishing circuit, and they really are owned or managed by universities or public agencies. But I just wanted to take a few minutes to tell you about the so many, and Juan Pablo knows them too, because we go, we assist to these congresses. There's so many journal networks, editors, congresses that are beyond Cielo, Latindex, Redalic, or Biblat. We not only have these networks, these publishing platforms, and La Referencia, which is a federation of repositories, we also have, and I'm only mentioning the ones that are active and have done events this year. So national associations of editors, the international associations, we have like 3 or 4 international congresses of editors in Latin America. And I haven't seen that in Europe, right? And so the conferences, I've been in 2 of these this year, and there was something so beautiful. When you spoke about the Nobel Prize, I was going to speak about a Nobel Prize. And you know which one? In this Congreso Internacional de Revistas Científicas in Talca that I was last week, I found this incredible thing. I didn't know that in 2022, and that's very bad for me, Panindex was created, which is a new national index in Panama, in this small country. Talking about the small countries like Uruguay, they created this index, this national index, and it's very counteracting the mainstream and all that. But they also give an annual prize. And if you see the videos, the editors are so incredibly happy about this. It's not even 1 peso, of course, but they also created this to show that the editor's work is really worthwhile. And so to go to the final part of this presentation, what we built is a cartography of the indexed diamond journals. We didn't include the non-indexed journals, which means non-indexed in the platforms or collection that evaluate the journals, not because you're not going to find any quality in them, but we're trying to change the researcher's choice. So we need to show some value for evaluation systems, and I think not today, but maybe tomorrow, I'm going to try to prove why indexation has to come in the conversation, and we have to revisit this definition of indexation. So in this cartography, what we found, let's just do 2 or 3 flags. For example, 1,340 diamond journals in Indonesia. Poland has really a very important amount of diamond journals. And of course, Brazil with 1,836, Argentina. And in the normal databases that we have for this, which the most important is DOAG, we only have 13,950. That was by June or July, this number. So at the end, we're talking about almost 18,000, which means that we have at least, or let's say, 4,000 journals that are not in DOAG. And where are they? In African Journals Online. This is without repetitions, of course. In the Finnish journal evaluation system, or Latindex, or Cielo, or in, of course, we took only the Web of and Scopus journals that they are 300, and they have some problems that I'm going to show. But if you see on the right, the other table, we try to find what's happening with these 301 journals where we can't identify the country. When I discuss with you, the people that really know about centrometrics, you say, well, it's so difficult to work on the country. In Latin America, we don't have any problem with that. It's very easy because the institution is there, the country is there, and it's there because these evaluation systems, the first of the 34 criteria they have is the institution, the academic institution. So it's very difficult to have this problem. And in this whole cartography, I have a problem with 300 only. And they are in your data set, the one that you've been checking empirically one by one. So something strange is there, and they come from Web of Science and Scopus. So again, the big publishers are not really publishing in Diamond. And to finish here, I just wanted to go to some conclusions, which is mainly that what is finally to recommunalize, or to try to go to a model that really gives reality to the idea of a community-led journal or an academically autonomous journal. I think the main role here is the role of the universities, and it is the agent that we can really have influence in. For example, in the International Association of Universities, where all the rectors are, in one of the conferences I went, I said, can you, as a rector, tell me the list of the journals that you have in your university and tell me who, if somebody has bought this, or is it in the hands of the academics of the university? And this non-commercial circuit, such as the Latin American circuit, shows that one of the main actors in Latin America is not only the university, but the library, the librarians and the repository. Some, well, the La Plata experience, the portal is managed related to the repository. In others, like here, repository and library, both. So we have different shapes of forms of these portals. But with Manu, we have made a survey on how many portals we have in Latin America. We haven't published that yet, but we have 786 in Latin America belonging to universities, and they publish 11,000 diamond journals. So this is an interesting organization. This is an interesting model. They centralize all these burden and costs about the DOI and the editorial processes. And we can foster these type of organizations to foster diamond publishing. What are the problems of Latin America? You all know maybe, but it's always important to say it. Our internal fragmentation. We still don't have a regional publishing platform. We still don't have a tool to know all these journals, in one place for all the researchers to find. Cielo and Redalic and Latindex, they're not interoperable, and we all know that's one of the major problems. And Latindex has a lot of journals that do not have the information on the article level. We're working on that a lot with the La Plata team and with Latindex, but it's very difficult, and also Juan Pablo knows that from a long time ago. And well, finally, my question also for the debate, let's say we recommunalize and we gain academic autonomy for the journals and they are chosen by our researchers. Is it enough to convince these researchers to publish in these journals? Well, how are we going to do that? It's the major question, I think. Thank you very much.
And we are going to follow up with Juan Pablo.
I'm doing the standing up thing part because we're alternating up and down. So great. So I'm doing two presentations in one and I'm actually, now that I was a bit worried about the timing of trying to do both of the things that I'm trying to communicate, two messages. But actually, a lot of the first part, the added on part, is responding a lot to some of the things you were just saying, Fernanda. So I think it's going to provide a nice segue. I wanted to come in, I was, although they have like 20 authors in that drain paper, I'm not one of them. And so I wanted to come in with the outside of that view and something different. It's no critique. I was asked. I saw it going around, but I wanted to come in with a very different lens of looking at what is the other part of the publishing system that often doesn't dominate the conversation of what we are talking about, what we're considering, what's going on in publishing. So I think paper by two people here on the stage here from 2015, in some ways, provided us the language and a lot of the narrative that drives how we talk about what goes on in publishing today. The oligopoly of publishers, the rise of the increasing centralization and control of publishing being in the hands of only a very small number of commercial actors. And of course, this is a story that is true and is something that we saw the evidence of the cost of this, but it's not the whole story, right? Stefanie already went over these set of graphs. So we see that these publishers, as they moved into open access, we also can see an increasing sort of dominance and growth in how much we're giving in terms of the resources to these commercial actors. So although that's shaped the narrative, and I'm here to challenge it in some ways, it's not to say that it's also not true and not happening, because it very much is. So that has been the narrative. In a recent paper with Vincent and Simon Van Vellen at ROD, we first confirm that when you look at the Web of Science, that story continues to be true. Like, we updated the data going into the 2020s. You still see that same story of increasing the control. A small handful of publishers have an increasing proportion of all that's publishing. But that oligopoly really only persists if you're looking at databases like the Web of Science. When we look at Dimensions or we look at OpenAlex, the story is exactly the opposite, right? When we're looking at everything that's published that's out there, this handful of large publishers are controlling a decreasing proportion. And the part that's growing, it's a very long tail of small publishers that are out there. And so when we talk about what's going on in the publishing world, the first part of the message that I have for today is that we really need to be concentrating on this growing portion of the market. And we're maybe not even calling it a market to go as you fall. It's very easy to fall into that narrative. And to say that in my role as the scientific director of the Public Knowledge Project, for those who don't know, part of the main thing that we do is create software that is used by tens of thousands. We're over 55,000 journals that are using the platform, almost all of them small journals that are published primarily in the Global South, half of them in languages other than English. We get sort of a chance to see firsthand at that growing segment, right? So those are none of those large 20 largest publishers are using OJS, but a very high proportion of those ones that are in that growing tail are part of these 55,000 that are currently using that platform. I put this QR code on this paper because we published this in 2022, and in fact, you should go read the paper, and that's why the QR code is there. But the title does most of the work of what we really wanted to do. And the point of having done this paper is that we've had the opportunity, by looking at what's published with OJS, to kind of put a number on that growing proportion, and to, in the hopes of what we're trying to do, is recalibrate what we consider to be scholarly publishing. And to say we shouldn't be measuring it by what's in Web of Science or what's in Scopus, we need to be measuring it and actually observing this very long tail of small publishing that's happening globally. We're able to look at what's being published with OJS as just a window into that world. It's not that OJS is that world, but it just provides us that window to look at that. And we see that there is actually a world of scholarship that's out there publishing from every continent, everywhere in the world. We see, I mean, just to give you like a bit of a sense, we see a huge amount in East Asia and the Pacific. We still see a lot in Europe, and as well in Latin America as sort of the biggest regions that are using the platform. And we're able to take a look at this growth, and this is like, you see the graph of sort of like the 10 largest publishers using OJS, but you have to carve out, because Indonesia and the explosion of publishing that's happening in Indonesia is a phenomenon that it took a really long time for people to recognize that it was even happening. And this kind of data, it was kind of, it made it real for people to realize, oh, there are like, 20,000+ journals published out of Indonesia that have all come up in the last 5 years. And no one was really paying attention to this happening. And it was not featured in the conversations and not featured in the databases that are used to understand scholarly publishing. So there's some new bibliometric opportunities that are presented by the fact, and like from the PKP perspective on what we're able to do with the journals using OJS. We're able to, because every version of OJS for a long time has a little feature that just tells us, it tells PKP, it just alerts us like an installation is here, and that's all that we get. So there's not really much in terms of details, but then we're able to, so from that we're able to collect sort of like tens of thousands of records of installations that are out there and journals that they have at those installations. And then from there, we're able to go to the journals and collect the article level data from an API that every OJS installation has. And so we're able to create a record of, now after we remove duplicates and so on, we have over 20 million records published in OJS from around the world. And we're working towards, and this is in part, this is the part of that response to what you were saying, we're working towards this concept of universal indexing, right? The idea that actually when we think about what is out there, we need to be using data sources that are actually inclusive of everything. starting with the journal publications as one starting point, but actually we want to work towards this idea that everything that is the part of the production, we should have a way of making it discoverable so that it can be counted in both senses of the word, so that it can actually be counted at the times of doing research assessments, but also so that we count that scholarship as valid scholarship that's happening out there in the world and not just be limited to what's indexed in selective sources. And trying to do this work as much as possible based on open research information and not on proprietary sources. So lots of questions that come up with this, like the research questions that we have from the perspective of what we're trying to do with the journals using OJS, right? So we want to know how well they're indexed, how complete it is, what's the quality of that metadata so that we can do this kind of an analysis and we can understand what's in that long tail. But also importantly, what and whose knowledge are we including when we do this better indexing? Like, who has been left out of the conversation? Who has been left out of the narrative of what you're doing as scholarship? Ultimately, we want to know if we can help to improve the systems that do the indexing so that we can provide a window into and help improve the situation for those that have previously been excluded from those conversations. What are the communities and also the knowledge domains or the ways of producing knowledge that have traditionally been left out of the conversation. So the small problem with doing this kind of work when you're trying to work with this distributed data sources, right? And it's like you have this diversity of tiny publishers that are out there, and the small problem that we're faced to deal with is that the metadata that's around these publications is a gigantic mess, right? And it's by design that it's a mess. We've purposely created a platform that enables it to be appropriated and used by different communities. So you want them to use it in different ways. You want them to use it for different purposes. You want them to do it in different languages. And you want to give them maximum control to publish in the ways that they want. That naturally produces messiness. Like when you give people the ability to do what they want, they will all do different things. And that you're not trying to standardize them. So this is the tension that exists of how do we kind of try to wrangle this data and kind of help to standardize it without taking away the autonomy from those communities. And how can we do that and curate that stuff at scale? There is still a gap, and this is you speaking to OpenAlex, and that it doesn't have the limitations that it currently has. We've been doing the analysis to see how much of the journals using OJS are included in OpenAlex. We see that it's only about 71% of the journals that are included right now that have at least one article indexed. But more problematically, it's that it's not just as a journal in or as a journal out. And this speaks to the messiness that's out there. So this big bar here those are the ones that 0% of their articles are indexed. So, and then normally we think of, a journal is in. So you would think, and that's all the way at the right, 100% of their articles are indexed. But actually what we find is that you have a whole bunch of journals. So these are number of journals for each one of these numbers. And these bars are the different proportions of their articles are actually included. And so you get into this messiness of some journals have DOIs for some, or they found a way to be indexed for others. And this kind of speaks to that it's not a simple, is it included or excluded? In fact, the majority, there's at least some of their content is included in the platform because they've managed to discover them. And OpenAlex does have a mission to want to include them. It's a technical capacity issue. So the big news that we have, and you'll be happy to hear this, is that we've got a commitment from OpenAlex that they're going to index 100% of the journals using OJS in 2026, because they're going to be using it based on the data that we have, like as PKP, we've been able to collect through the beacon. They're going to ingest the data set that we've created for every article. So everything that is published on OJS, if we're able to find it, they're going to be able to index it. So that's the response to help locate where we put OpenAlex in your quadrants. And the other things that from the PKP perspective we're doing is that we're going to be building some additional features and tools into OJS to help to organize that metadata so that that indexing that will be coming is going to be possible to do it in better ways. So those are sort of the big, bold, in orange news is that we've worked on that. And that's part of this research that we've been doing around understanding the challenges of indexing is going to be able to create that part. So that's all the first presentation. So let me move on to the second one. Because again, if we wanted to change the narrative around what's going on in these journals and we want to understand this long tail, right? So first challenge is is what I was just saying. We need to actually be considering that that long tail of small publishers is the world and the system that we want to be considering, right? The second challenge is, okay, well, now we need to find ways of understanding them. The bibliometric opportunities are going to give us one window into understanding the extent of the production. We can understand the knowledge domains. We can understand the countries and places, the co-authorship. There's a lot of things we can understand by being able to gather the metadata. But that's not helping us to then understand what are the actual ways in which these journals are being produced and organized. And that's something that, again, in response to what Fernanda was just saying, the narrative around Diamond Open Access today is being dominated by some of the projects in Europe that have a conceptualization of what a journal community is and how it operates that doesn't reflect the reality of these tens of thousands of small journals published particularly in places in the global south. And there's different, Latin America has a very particular way in which things have been done here that looks very different than what you see in the new journals emerging in Indonesia, for example, or other communities. And they all have particularities, so we need to also go beyond just the bibliometrics. We need to actually understand the models of what's behind them. And so we've been trying to also use this connection that we have to the journals to try to dig into this a little bit. So we've done a survey now. It's actually fairly imperfect. The beacon, because we're able to go to the installations, we can gather the contact information for the person running the installation. The person that set up a journal managing platform is very different than the person that's actually running the journal. And so you have to take some of these things that we're presenting is not the best person to be contacting. But we had about 15,000 email addresses that we were able to get. 5,000 of them were like out of date or invalid, or we couldn't really reach them anymore. About 10,000 email addresses. We're able to then reach out to them, and we ended up with about almost under 2,000 responses, 1,500 or so valid ones. And after we made sure we had only one response per journal, about 1,300 journals we're able to get some information about. Roughly, the number of responses that we got from this survey are kind of roughly correspond to where journals are using OJS. It's not perfectly representative, but at least gives us a sense. Naturally, Indonesia and Brazil are the countries with the most respondents. But we're able to kind of get, let me just jump forward just in the interest of time. We're able to start asking some questions around what are they doing. And so we're starting it with some questions around the business models and the ownership and control. And these are the questions that come to as we want to talk about community-led scholarly publishing, or we want to think about the financing, or we want to think about the questions around the drains of the economics of the journals. We need to understand in these small journals published around the world what is actually happening inside of them. The first question is, are they actually all open access, right? Because the idea, and everyone has always thought, I mean, our project is called the Public Knowledge Project, so we were really hoping that by making this platform freely available to them, they would make things open access. And the first confirmation is that almost all of them are some form of, they're almost all immediate open access. And then the other ones are some other form or some delayed open access. And only 1% are charging subscriptions, at least of the ones that responded to the survey. So we're, at least this is the first sigh of relief. Okay, we have not, by creating this open source platform, enabled a whole bunch of new subscription closed publishing. But then we get at the second question, and this is part of understanding the changing dynamics, right? We present the data that Stefanie presented, that work we've been doing is looking at the APCs, at the commercial, at the oligopoly. But what is happening at the small community-owned journals? First response is that 19% of the people that responded to, of the journals that responded to the surveys are charging some APCs. Much bigger number than we first expected. But we'll dig into it's not as dire as it seems. The first thing is that 91% of these are charging less than $500 for the APCs. So there's charging APCs, but they're small. The second is that the APCs are not evenly distributed amongst the journals. There's actually some countries that are moving towards the APC model. And here, what's happening in Indonesia is actually like over half of the journals in Indonesia are charging APCs. And it's half of the journals using OJS. And so understanding that what's happening there, it's a different thing that's happening there than is happening elsewhere. Part of it is that by enabling APCs, it's created a source of revenue not for the journals, but for the university systems in Indonesia. We're actually finding that the journals become a revenue source for the general revenues of the university. That's something that we don't have that much data on. That part of it is a bit more anecdotal, but we're able to see that actually half the journals are charging ABC. Yeah, we've got, okay. Great. I've actually almost that anyway. This is where you start to see some countries that have very small number of journals, but they have high proportions of going APCs. Some other countries have higher proportion of, they have a lot of journals, and they have the sort of varying proportions of APCs. So we are seeing that this is not a universally, every country is the same. But we need to start being able to start digging into these questions if we want to understand how to better support these alternative models. If we don't want to understand also the implications of making money available for APCs means it creates opportunity for even the small journals to say, now this becomes a source of revenue and sustainability. We asked them, have you always charged APCs? And they're split about 50-50. Half of the journals were born as APC journals. And the other half, the ones that are charging APCs, have moved to this model more recently. Again, showing the pressures and how the APC model starts to slowly absorb and take on more and more of the community that has traditionally sustained itself in different ways. We know that these journals are largely small. We looked at the number of people that are participating in the journals. You start seeing that you have, the majority of them are running with under 6 people participating. And so we've got 2/3 of a third with 1 to 3, a third with 4 to 6. And the number of people compensated, you see a third, nobody gets paid, a third, 1 or 2 people get paid, right? So we know that the financials, these are things that, and I'm seeing some nods, because anyone that's working in journals in Latin America knows that these kinds of stats, but we need to be able to provide the evidence so that we can better understand. We know that they largely receive supports from academic institutions. Again, this is what Fernanda was saying around universities in different ways, right? They're receiving cash or in-kind supports, and then they're receiving, but APCs are the third most common source of actual revenue for journals, mostly in small and mid-sized teams. And then we get into this messy question around ownership and control, which I think will be a good place to end so that it'll be good fodder for the conversation. We do see that mostly are affiliated with universities. We asked them the question, who is your owner and who is your publisher, as 2 separate questions. And so we've got fairly similar distributions. This data gets really messy very fast because people claim 3 different owners and 3 different or 4 different publishers. But we do see that the vast majority are being published by, all of these are kind of academic groups. And we see a few like commercial publishers are sort of fairly small number of the journals that are using OJS. Just to give you a bit more of the numbers, we see the ones that claim like they have only 1 owner, right? So again, mostly the biggest numbers are all in the academic groups. Sort of, just for the interest of time, I'll sort of skip over the details on the numbers, but you'll get a bit of a sense of like the number of like people. Academic units tend to be the largest. But we do get all of these mixes of people that are claiming ownership is like partially by different parts of a university, or that have a publisher and a university as co-owners. To me, all of this speaks to people don't particularly have a very rigid definition, or the ownership structures and the governance structures are not clear. Who makes the decisions about academic control? Most journals claim it's the editors themselves, right? It's like the board governance itself, and this again speaks to a very different ownership model than in the commercial publishing sector, where the publisher is sort of in charge of the decision making. And the same with who makes operational decisions. Again, people are just saying basically the journals are the ones doing it all themselves. I'll end with just say there's lots of limitations to this work. It's not really representative of that larger community. It's still not even representative of the OJS PKP community because of the way that we're able to access them. But it does sort of create an exciting opportunity to look at the inner workings of these journals, to go beyond the bibliometrics, and into understanding the thousands of journals in this long tail of scholarly publishing. what is happening to them kind of really matters if we're trying to understand how we want to evolve the scholarly community. Like, they're getting sucked down the drain and they're getting pulled into the economic models of the large commercial publishers. And we need to understand what's going on at these small journals if we're ever going to have a way of protecting them or to safeguarding the approaches that they're taking. Thanks.
Well, thank you very much, the four of you, Juan Pablo también. I come from an institution that publishes two journals in Diamond Open Access, so thank you very much for OGS, because we are also using it. And but we never got the information about your encuesta, no? So we didn't answer it. In theory, we have 5 minutes for our discussion because we have the coffee break, but we started a little bit late, so I would propose that we take a few more minutes. So I would like to invite you for having comments or questions. The floor is open. I think we have to use the mic, because if not...
Thank you all for your presentations. Really sad and amazing at the same time. I don't know if this is a question or a thought, but you made me think. Stefanie talked a lot about the cost of the journals and why authors still want to publish in journals that cost thousands of dollars of PC, and it's basically because they have prestige, and because if you are a researcher and you publish in a journal with prestige, you get a better evaluation. So we know the evaluation system needs to change to be at least to reconsider if this is the way. I don't know. But then Vincent, you talk about that we are doing a lot of science worldwide, and that's really okay, right, really fine, but we are producing too many papers. And this is creating this tension in the system because we can't review all those papers, and that's also true, it's impossible to get a reviewer. We are working on that, maybe. But I am also thinking that scientists need to communicate their findings, of course, and if we are doing that many science, it's clear that we will have a lot to communicate. And these communications, and they need to be evaluated somehow, because we can publish whatever you want anywhere, because this is what is happening in many places today. And then Fernanda, you talk about going diamond, and I totally agree with that, but there are still journals, diamond journals, so if we create more diamond journals and with OJS and all the platforms we have for free, if we foster that publication in journals, then the issue with that will get even worse. And then so if they are not the articles, we should stop publishing that many articles. What can we do to communicate science? Because a PhD dissertation, it takes longer to evaluate, it's harder, and it takes more time to be created, and we need more money and whatever. And then we have maybe, I don't know, these workshops or conference and congress, but they are not the same, not always the same, and the quality and rigorosity is very different between different conferences, and it's hard for the evaluation systems to tell if a paper published in a conference holds some kind of quality, and if it is published in a journal, at least we know something about the journal because it is, I don't know, evaluated by Cielo, let's say. What do we do? That's the question. where to go. We can review all those papers, but with those papers, we are doing a lot of science. The AI is making us create science really faster, really easy, or much easier. What do we do?
Manuel, how complicated would it be to go back to my slides? So just the last two or so. So I hear you. So it's really complicated, and I think it's both connected to the market in the sense that, you know, like ideally we would, we would take the hose, the fire hose of money we're putting into the for-profit publishers, and I think we'd be okay with, you know, if we stop this drain, just taking a fraction and putting it into this, you know, circuit of diamond journals, of regional journals, and so on. So I'm not saying do more, but do it elsewhere. And so redirecting obviously the money to fund the infrastructure, but then we don't want people to publish additional papers in diamond journals. We want them to stop publishing in the for-profit journals. And then you're rightfully so, you're saying, well, but that doesn't really help me to get a tenure track position, to get an academic career, doesn't even help me to get new funding because the committee looks at where I publish. But remember, the committee is us, right? We're making these decisions too. We're saying, oh, he didn't publish in the right journals, he doesn't deserve the money to do more science. So I already told you I'm an optimist. There are things we can do, and this is one of the, this was Open Access Week this year, and I just thought, because I get this a lot on these kind of panels where the average researcher, often also early career researcher, asks, so what can I do? And there are some things that were in the drain, we're saying, well, we need some top-down help to change the rules, to change what we value, but we can do a lot of little things if, as a community, all of us do them a little, we can change the system too. And so I came up with this list. I'd love input, and here maybe, especially in Argentina or South America, is that the same perspective? Because this is certainly a global North American, European perspective. But there's 13 things that as a researcher you can do to move towards more equitable and sustainable publishing. And for us today, I picked out some that all of us can do. So we can actively submit to nonprofit journals instead of the oligopoly journals. We can also just, there's a lot of power in not doing anything. You can decline to do reviews for Elsevier and Springer and so on. And you can also decline invitations for editorial boards of these. And I have one anecdote where I actually asked myself, oh, would I have reacted the same way if I hadn't had tenure? But I got asked, this was 6 years ago, I think. No, sorry, 4 years ago. So this was after I had tenure, by JSIS, the Journal of the Association of Information Science and Technology. In information science, you would say this is the journal, okay? I think more early career people would also say, oh, this is the ones that help you get a tenure track position. And I have published in this, so one of the big papers that I did during my postdoc with Vincent was there, and it probably helped me get the prof position in some sense. And then that journal contacted me a year after I got tenure and said, we would like to invite you to be part of our editorial board. And then I thought hard and long, and it's a Wiley journal, okay? So it's a society journal, but it's published by Wiley, and it's subscription, and it's hybrid, and it charges $3,000 or something per paper. And I wrote back and I said, look, if the editorial board is interested in moving to gold open access, and at the time, let's say 5 years ago, I was still like, diamond wasn't as en vogue in the global north, so I said, moving to a gold open access model with a reasonable APC to cover certain costs, then I'd consider joining the board to help make the transition, because just a few years before we had stepped down from an editorial board with an Elsevier journal, Journal of Infometrics, to found QSS. So I think I've never gotten such a quick response from the editor-in-chief to say, nope, we're not doing that. So then I said, well, then I'm not doing that either. But I actually wondered, what would I have done a year before, where I was literally putting together my tenure file, which would have made a nice item in whatever committee assesses, oh, she's on the editorial board of JSIS. So But we can do these, and I think it's easier for us as established profs with funded permanent positions to do it. But then often I hear on these panels professors who are established in their own fields, and they say, yeah, I could do this, but then I have all of these early career researchers that I publish with, that I supervise, my PhD students. I want them to have careers too, so I can't really make the shift. But if nobody does it, that's why we're still in with the same problems. So this list, I think, is anybody can do it, and I try to also estimate who at what career stage can do it, because some things are only possible for more advanced researchers, and then also to estimate this risk or perceived risk for your career. And a lot of those things are like, there is no risk, and there's maybe just medium risk. So I think there's a lot we can do. But it takes all of us to change the system, and I think it would go faster if it's the whole like top-down is aligned as well with university leadership and funders.
Thank you, Stefanie. I would like to make 2 very short points, and then I come over to you.
There's a question also in the chat, in the Zoom, that I have here.
You have it?
Yeah.
Okay. Just for Vincent, one of your last tables about peer review that shows us that only about 20% of the articles get major changes.
Yeah.
Yeah, but then there are also the, 50% of articles that go out of the process. And so this might be fun. And one thing with regard to Fernanda, when you ended up with all this beautiful and so important landscape of open science journals, open access in Latin America. And I think the biggest problem in the region, and perhaps we're going to talk about it in other panels also, I think is science policy that doesn't valorize this. Because if you say to your researchers, well, if you are going to publish in Web of Science, you're going to have 10 points, and if you're going to publish in Scopus, you are going to have 5 points, and well, for Cielo, I give you 1 point. Yeah, this is reality. This is not invented. No. So I think this is the biggest challenge in Latin America to, of course, also to have regional repositories, yeah, and not all this fragmentation, but also to have other science policies.
Maybe one quick comment on the papers that end up being published. A couple of years ago, we did an analysis of archive preprints and what proportion ended up being published in journals. And within like 2 years after the submission of the preprint, that percentage was at about 85%. So most preprints get published. So we can infer that most papers get published. Of course, the preprints may be the good subset of papers that have been written, so it may be lower than that. But these data need to, I think, should be updated at some point to see.
Comment, no?
Thanks. Is it okay? Oh, it's going. Okay. So thanks for the presentations. It was amazing. But I wanted to go back to Steffi's point and to say, I don't believe in individual action. I don't think we need to do anything as individuals. Maybe it changes. Maybe there are different levels of privilege, but this, like our system, the academic system, is a competitive system that is where the level of competition is rising. So the problems for career prospects are, it's ever more hard to have a stable position. And in Argentina, we are facing one of the worst situations in that sense. So with the precarity, with increasing precarity, with increasing competition, I think the individual action is not a strong action, but that's why the working class created the unions, because it's in the collective actions where we can find our strength, and it's the collective action of researchers that can also press the institutions and the different institutional levels to have policies and to have implementations and to change the research evaluation. But I think we need collective action as scientific workers to pursue an agenda for open access, for changing the research evaluation systems globally and on each individual institution. And I think it's through those type of actions that we can get long-term solutions.
I propose Peter, our moderator, to take the final questions and then give us time to answer everything. What do you think? I have one in the chat. Oh, Max is also.
We take one more.
And the chat.
Maxi, and then you
okay.
Give us one from the chat.
Perfect. And then we have 1-2 minutes each.
Hello, I have a question for Juan Pablo. I was wondering about OGS and the impact that it have in the global south, especially in Indonesia. And according to the data that you presented, the oligopoly that it's mainly from the global north, and the constantly, especially I believe in the Indonesian case of the journals that APC have the half of the OGS edited journals. Do you believe that this is something that could that maybe could increase the possibility of the mechanization of the global south via ABC rather than a commercial publisher strangling on these journals like Latin America and South Asia?
Shall I read the Zoom question, Peter? First of all, we have a beautiful message by Dominique Babini, who addresses, of course, her congratulations, and she's saying we're going to make dissemination of this in CLACS, etc. And we have a question by the dear Alejandra Nardi from the National University of Córdoba, a very important and long-standing intellectual in all these. And she says, well, congratulations, she read the DRAIN paper, and she's just wondering, well, it's great to ask funders, governments, and universities for action. Have you imagined some of these? Because, and I would start with my first minute answer to some of these things. And I think, yes, you've mentioned individual actions. I think it's important. Diego said, well, we need collective action, and we have to see what type of associations or organizations this could be there for help. But I think that if we go back to the question by Gonzalo, if we foster diamond scholarly publishing, is the drain going to stop or not? What's going to happen with that? The first thing that's going to happen, I think, is that the time of peer review is going to change completely. Remember in our discussion that I showed, there is one very good paper in Redalic comparing the time of peer review, and it's like from 6 months to a year. I mean, and that's not going to change because they cannot face this with the machines or the EA and all this technical stuff that the big publishers have. But I think that one way through could be related to what you said, Vincent, the fact that we could see new publishing circuits with different types of review. One is preprint, and it's growing a lot. We are deciding to publish in preprint and sometimes not even publishing in the journals. And also public communication of science is another important circuit, very important for the relationship between the universities and society, and we should foster that too, without all these complicated peer review. And related to your question, Peter, of course, and when I finished my conclusions, I said, well, one of our problems is we don't have this regional platform, interoperable, to show all this production. But the other problem is something that I've written like 10 years ago. We have an alienation in philosophical terms between all the support that our governments, public universities are giving to these journals, and the very, very little we value them in the research assessment systems in Latin America, and with these national categorization systems that are pushing all the time for the impact factor. So as Ludo Waldman said, we have research assessment reform and open science reform to go hand in hand. If not, it's impossible, I think.
Thank you for all your questions. I just want to focus on the Indonesia example. So I don't know much yet, but we're studying this as part of our Volkswagen grant, where we're looking at 6 select countries, and Indonesia is one of them because of the patterns that we're seeing. Colombia is another one. But that rise and the large number of diamond journals, they're all run by university presses. But you see, if you look at the bibliometric evidence of papers published by someone in Indonesia, it's all going back to 2017. It went like this. It was exponential, and that's due to them actually having a law. And this is a presidential law, so not president of the university, president of the country, that everyone that wrote a master thesis or a PhD has to publish those results. And they established, which I think that the global north has a lot to learn, and I think it's very much under researched, is that they created this system of diamond journals published by university presses, and most of them are actually in Indonesian, in the local language, and they have a system that where there's some quality control because they assess the journal, and either it makes it on the list for the implementation of the law of like it counts you if you published or not. They also have the problem that they also value Scopus index journals very highly, but in addition to that, they have this regional diamond journal system, and very interesting for I think all of us, but especially in Argentina now, they're doing that with almost no money because Indonesia is not well financed. There's evidence of like even professors having to have other jobs because they can't. It's not enough income. So it's interesting in this, like it's really coming top down. It has also led to maybe not every single publication there is of very high quality, but it has created this boom of open access publishing, and it's all going back to this 2017 law. Yeah.
I'll be quick. So I agree with what my colleague said. I just want to follow up on the issue with reviewing. So we didn't talk much about AI, which is seen by some people as the way to solve many things. And so I wanted to make a slide on that. So what's the use of AI for reviewer? And I left it blank because seriously, I found nothing that AI could help. So what I did, I said, well, I will ask AI what it thinks it can do for us. And I must say that I was happily surprised about the humility that it had. It said, listen, like it freaked out a bit, I feel like. It's okay, I cannot assess originality. I cannot assess whether it's important or not. The only tasks that I can do are technical. I can do a first pass screener. I can help you find reviewers. I can improve the text of the review for clarity. And so I'm kind of a tool for you. But so it was quite humble. So first I was happy, I must say, with the answer. But personally, I don't think that's really useful. That's probably. I'm
what
sure
you wanted to hear.
For others, it may be something else. But that's not the solution. And writing with AI has become cheap. It used to be difficult to write text. Now it's a very, very easy thing, which means that the curve that we're seeing in numbers of papers is actually likely to increase, which means that papers will be less and less important to the system. So the solution, as a bibliometrician, it's something terrible to say, but stop counting papers. That's it. Publishing, for these reasons, is no longer something important. We need to find other ways of evaluating, not other ways of disseminating. We need still to write papers to understand each other, but we need to use that as a tool to assess the quality or excellence.
So we're a few different things I think that I want to use to conclude. One, partially in answer to Diego's comment about individual action, I agree. I think that this goes beyond in the academic sphere. This is that putting all of the responsibilities on individual actions is challenging, is problematic, rather. I think the perspective that we've been trying to take, at least from people building infrastructures, is to at least try to create conditions under which people that you can give more equal footing to different communities that have been traditionally, in some ways, like oppressed or excluded from being evaluated. And the idea of universal indexing as a mechanism at least says if you're going to be continue, the system is not changing, at least give people that are operating from the margins a fighting chance to participate. Okay, pardon. So I think that there is the things that we can do as a collective is to try to structurally change the system, and that I think that there are things that we can do from a technical platforms perspective and systems that can help to produce that systemic change that individual actions might not succeed in. And partially so that things that are produced in the South, things produced in languages other than English, are at least can be parts of the assessment. Because right now, even if as a collective we wanted to value them, the systems don't allow it to happen. So trying to create those material conditions. In answer to Maxi's question, there's two parts, I think, in terms of my response. One is that this is, as we create this platform that has made it possible for tens of thousands of journals to exist and be created, we're also, those journals are still part of the larger system that are subjective to the pressures that exist and the decisions that are made beyond those platforms. And we see that we've been warning against the dangers of the APC model and how it would become, it's a model that has, the more money that is made available, the more pressures that every journal has to move to that model. And then what we're seeing in Indonesia is, I think, unique in that it's not just as the number of journals grows, they are like, well, what's the model that's readily available? The APC model. But then the interesting twist there is that it's not for the enrichment, they're publicly owned or institutionally, they're community run and led journals, but then they're using that economic model to finance things beyond the journal in some cases. And I think this is what we need to understand this phenomenon, because there is a real risk right now of also hanging as if Diamond is going to solve so many of these problems. As if we say, oh, look, Latin America has been doing it so well for so many years. If we don't understand what is actually, how that system is changing right now, we're going to just pretend like that's going to be a solution. And it's really not going, it's not fixed. And this is I think I've been warning about for over too long. I don't even want to count the years. That the model that we have in Latin America of this diamond publishing is right now is being held as the ideal by Europe, and they're looking at Redelic as like they're like, oh, look how perfect Latin America does it. But it is not entrenched or embedded. None of those ideals are built into the system here. It is just as at risk of being sucked into the exact same problems that the global north commercialized circuits have always had. And we can't see them as the solution to the overproduction. We can't see them as the business models of the journals as being the solutions to the evaluation system. We need to understand the different dynamics that are at play. And then I think the message that I'm calling for today is that we really need to examine closely what's happening in the long tail so that we can try to protect what's good about it and try to entrench into the national systems the parts of those systems that are good and not, or the parts that we agree with, that we see are going in a positive direction, and not just assume that if they're scholar-owned or scholar-led, it's going to be great and that it's going to solve any problem. I'll finish with that.
So thank you very much to our four panelists. Thank you also our interpreters. We don't see them, but those of you them hear them. I think this was a great start. There are a lot of questions. There are already some answers. I think there will be more. But first, there is coffee.